So today we're going to be looking at how to organize qualitative data into tables and graphs and charts. So just a reminder, qualitative data is data that is descriptive or is describing some characteristic of an individual. So sometimes it's called descriptive or categorical. So like colors or I don't know, food or your favorite school. Height is not a qualitative piece of data because that is a number that you measure.
Yeah.
Now remember, there are some numbers though that are qualitative data, like phone numbers. That's qualitative data. Like jersey numbers on like football jerseys is qualitative data. There are numbers that describe people instead of being used to measure or count. So those would be considered qualitative, even though technically they are a number. So today we're going to be focusing on just the qualitative data. So we're going to be collecting some quick data here as a class. So first I need you to take a second and think about who your cell phone service provider is. Choice are AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, or other. Just take a minute. Think. So then I need... Okay, so we have our data. Again, this is qualitative data because the answer to the question was AT&T or Verizon. That's a categorical piece of data. It's describing your service provider. So with this data, with this qualitative data that we have collected, we can do a couple things. First, we're going to start with different types of distributions. Whenever you see distribution, really all I'm asking you to do is to construct a table. So frequency distribution is the same as saying a frequency table or a relative frequency table. So with a frequency distribution or a frequency table, this is just where you list your different categories. And the number of individuals in that category. So frequency is just how many times did you get that answer. Oops, another number. For each occurrence. Of each occurrence. Oh my gosh. So for example, down at the bottom here, we have our table. We have, you list your categories first. So we have a title, service providers, telling us what our categories are. And then listing all the possible options, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, and other. And then next to it, your second column would just be titled frequency. And right now we're just going to focus on the total number of people for each service provider. And so we basically already did that up when we were gathering our data in the total number column. So we have 5 people from AT&T, so the frequency is 5, 6 for T-Mobile, 5 for Sprint, and 10 for Verizon, and 1 for other. So the frequency distribution is pretty straightforward. Just list your categories and then the total number of people or things in each category, depending on the data you're collecting. Okay. Then relative frequency distribution, you have to do a little bit of work here, but relative frequency is the proportion of each category, or each category's frequency. To the population. And this one can be written either as a decimal or a percent. There are times where one makes more sense than the other, but both are fine. So to find the relative frequency for each category, you take the frequency for each individual category divided by your population, or the sum of all your frequencies. So if we look at our data, we add up all our frequencies. I think we have 27. Yep, we have 27 total. So when we're finding our relative frequency, which will be our last column here, you take the number or the frequency of each category, so 5, divided by your total. So 5 divided by 27. And then 6 divided by 27. And so on. You do that for each category. So you're going to want your calculators, because then again we can write this as a decimal or a percent. So you do the division, 5 divided by 27. That gives you 0.19, around the 2 decimal places is fine. So you have 0.19, or you can write it as a percent, which would be 19%. So again, either one. Sometimes using the decimal makes more sense, sometimes using the percent makes more sense. Just depends on the context, but they both are representing relative frequency. So you can do that for all of our categories here. So you should get 0.22 for 22%. And then 0.19 again. And then 0.37. And 0.04. Okay. So again, going from frequency to relative frequency, you just divide your frequency by the total number of people in your population. If you wanted to go backwards, if you had the relative frequency and you wanted to know, well, how many people are in that category, you would just take your relative frequency as a decimal, multiply by the total, and that would end up giving you the number. So going from frequency to relative frequency, divide by the total. Going from relative frequency to frequency, multiply by the total. One way to double check that you did your relative frequencies correctly is if you add them all up, they should equal about 1. Since we did some rounding, it might not equal exactly 1, but as long as it's close to 1, that can give you just a way to double check to make sure that you were calculating everything correctly. Okay, so the last line here, which I kind of wrote over, so I'll write underneath it, but tables are useful because they provide exact values for your data. All right. So what we're going to do now, we're going to be looking at a few different ways to represent this qualitative data in graphs and charts. We're going to be looking at bar graphs, side-by-side bar graphs, and pie charts. So I know some of you have probably seen, or hopefully you've all seen them before. Some of you probably remember more than others. So how we're going to do this, instead of me just having to go through and just me talk at you all hour, which can get annoying, we're going to have some stations around the room.